So good afternoon. My name is Julie Roberts. I am one of the co-founders and current president of the Private Sector Emergency Management Association. I just want to thank all of you for joining us today for our monthly webinar series. This is the 5th in our series this year. It's great to see a lot of familiar faces and also a number of new ones. Today's webinar is being recorded so that we can post it on our website, and please share with others that were not able to attend today. Please take a moment to enter your name, your organization, contact information into the chat. Not only does that help us capture who all is in attendance, but it's also an opportunity for you all to exchange contact information, which is a key focus of PSEMA. At the end of this webinar, you will receive an email with a survey. We ask that you please fill it out and let us know what you think about today's topic, other future topics you would like to see. And there will also be another email that comes out with a link to the webinar. So please feel free to send that on to others as well. For those of you who are new to PSEMA, let me just give you kind of a high level overview. So PSEMA was started almost 2 years ago. I was sitting on a call with the National Business EOC for Hurricane Ida, and a number of business industry partners were asking questions. And the standard response was to contact the state of Louisiana. Having worked in the state of Florida in their business EOC, I knew that wasn't the solution. And that's really when PSEMA was created. I saw a need that really puts the business and industry and our partners together in order to talk about problems ahead of time, planning things like business continuity, but also being able to come together when something happens and solve those problems. I always say wherever we as the business and industry partners can come together and fix a problem, government can focus on those really big events, or more importantly, things like getting the power back on, getting the roads open so that business and industry can come back. Tom Sirio, I'm going to introduce in just a second, and Kathy Fulton, who are two of our co-founders, had an opportunity last week. We were in Orlando and we got to spend about an hour and a half with former FEMA Administrator Fugate. And Craig is a close family friend, and he was there for a meeting. And so we all sat down and talked about what did he see as the business and industry role inside of FEMA. And so we got a lot of insight. And so we'll be taking those conversations and really developing what does PSEMA look like over the next year and a half. So I welcome all of you. If you have questions, if you're interested and you're not a member of PSEMA, please feel free to reach out to me. My email is julie@psema.org. And you can also go to our website. There's a lot of resources there. And for those who are active members this week, we sent out an update to those active members with information on the Pennsylvania road closure due to I-95. I'm also going to apologize if I flinch. We have a massive storm apparently moving in and thunder just struck. So if I jumped, that was why. I apologize. So really excited that all of you are here today. I'm going to turn it over now to Tom Sirio. Like I said, he is one of our co-founders, and Karen Wasbinski, who is with Integrity and is a certified business continuity planner. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to the two of them. I will say, if you have questions, if you want to put them into the chat, feel free to do that. Or also, if you want to raise your hand, then one of us can call on you as well so that we can, we'll open those up to questions. If you don't have, I apologize, Rick. It should have been Insperity, not Integrity. Apologize for that. And so if you do have questions, we want this to be interactive. So please speak up, ask those questions, whatever you want to do now, or at the end, we'll also have some time. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Mr. Sirio to kick it off with Karen.
Great. Thank you, Julie. Thank you. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. I just want to make one point, is that PSEMA is run by the business sector, for the business sector, to help the business sector. This is not a government program, although we allow government entities to come in and maybe be members. This is run by the private sector. So everybody we've spoken to is really, really interested to see how well this goes and wants to support the program, because we really have never seen a private sector initiative on this level before. So we are forging ahead. We understand, and we know, and we've experienced the fact that the private sector is a major part of recovery. And why shouldn't we be at the table with the government guide? We've tried for many years. Now I think we're getting better traction. So on behalf of Karen, I'd like to welcome everybody. And there are a lot of things we're going to talk about today. A lot of you folks I know are seasoned professionals, and that's great. And a lot of you folks are new to this or don't understand the full scope of PSEM, Business Continuity Management. So we're going to share a lot of good information today. And we're trying not to make it a presentation, it's more of a conversation. Because between Karen and I, we have over 50 years of experience in the fields: disaster recovery, business continuity, crisis management, incident response, all that kind of stuff. And we do have a lot to share. And we also have a lot to learn from folks like you who have been through things like this. So I know we only have a short time to meet today, just a little bit under an hour now. But yeah, if you have questions, put them in the chat, raise your hand. We'll take questions live if we can. We do have a lot of content to go through here. Some of the considerations for effective planning, as you see on the slide, understanding current regulation, talk about that a little bit, advantage of using software as a service products, conducting BIAs, the importance of that, the criticality of that, and the importance of employee list versus call trees. What works better now than worked 10 years ago? So Karen and I are really just going to kind of take it away here. Let me start with this here, and then I'll let Karen add her background and thoughts. We always talk about, why do we need a plan? Why have a plan? Well, I'll tell you what, why not? Okay. FEMA has done studies, and a lot of organizations have done studies where over 40%, 50% of businesses that don't have plans fail to reopen. That's real. That could be your business. Thunder over here too, out here in Florida. That's typical of this time of day, the afternoon thunderstorms. But we've got to think about this. If we don't do our due diligence, we fail to open. That's not good for anybody. It's not good for the company, for the employees, families, stakeholders, shareholders, and things like that. So we've got to be ready for the next one. And the other thing is very surprising. I'm a consultant now, and I do peruse the job boards on Indeed and LinkedIn. It's amazing that I can see so many large corporations who are looking for somebody to come in and help develop a program, as in kind of like they're saying, hey, we don't have one, we need help putting one together. And my mind gets boggled, like, how can you, as a corporation, a big company, not have a plan in place? So there's a lot to go here, a lot to think about. I'll give you a couple of real life examples in a second, but Karen, why don't you tell the crowd who you are, what we're doing here?
Okay, my name is Karen Wozbinski. I am with Insperity. I do their business continuity and disaster recovery program. I work for, as many of you know, Rick. Rick is my boss. So, and together we partner in to integrate the BC business continuity, disaster response, emergency preparedness for the organization as a whole. So that's who we are. But I just wanted to, add into what Tom was saying and why have a plan. There are many reasons, as Tom said, but the importance of it is, as an organization, most organizations say they care about their people. If you care about your people, you're going to have a plan and you're going to make sure they're prepared, not only at work, but also in their personal lives. So the better they are prepared at home, the better they'll be prepared and ready to come back to work when you need them.
Karen, that's a great point. Not enough companies put emphasis on people continuity. And that could be their employees, their customers, their patients, and things like that. One of my previous jobs, in my job description, actually had a component of people continuity. And to me, that says, oh, okay, good. This company gets it. They understand the fact that we have to look at the employees. As Karen said, if we don't prepare the employee for the disaster, they're not going to come back to work, which means you're not going to get up and running. You can have a great plan, but if you don't have anybody to execute the plan, you're going to fail. Let me give you a real life example. Down here in Florida, I've been down here for 20 years now in South Florida. I came down here for a job with Office Depot. I was heading up their global business continuity program, and Hurricane Wilma came through in 2005 and pretty well spanked us on the backside of the storm, where our campus of 2,200 employees and 3 buildings was shut down. We had to declare a disaster on our campus because we couldn't get back up and running. So the declaration of a campus disaster meant that we had to implement all 35 business continuity plans. Okay, it wasn't pretty, but it was effective. If we had no plan, we wouldn't know where to start. So when you talk about the downfall of not planning, you don't know anything. You're going to be, it's not business as usual. You're outside the office. You're trying to scratch your head and say, okay, what do we need to think of here? Well, this, when a blue sky day, or when it's a blue sky day, that's the time you need to be thinking about what to put into your disaster plan. So if you folks, anybody on this call who does not have a disaster plan, you've got to put it together now, because we don't know when that next disaster is going to hit. Karen, what do you have on from regulations though? I know we have, when we do our planning, it's easy to scratch a plan together, but depending upon the business sector you're in, there are a lot of regulations, and Karen's going to talk about that for a second.
Yeah, so in terms of whatever industry you fall in, there may be some regulations that you need to follow. For banking, it's FFIEC guidelines you need to follow. There are ISO standards. In healthcare, you've got HIPAA and PEI. There are great free resources out there that if you don't have to follow any regulations, you can, and this is what we did for our organization. I was most familiar because I had a banking background before I came to Insperity. So I picked and chose between FFIEC and ISO guidelines to create our program and the framework for what we follow for our organization. So it doesn't have to be that, oh, I'm going to follow this regulation even though it doesn't pertain to us. There's good guidance in there that can get you to where you want to be and what is the right fit for your organization.
Yeah, and Karen, that's a good point where if you're not in a regulated industry, you can always look at these standards and say, hey, I want to enhance my program, my business continuity program. Let me go look at ISO 22301, which is actually business continuity standards. Okay, there are other organizations out there, other organizations, as in NIST, the National Institute for Standards and Technology. They have a standards section for business continuity planning, where they have processes, planning guidelines, templates, and things like that. NFPA, Dr. Lorenzo is mentioning here. Yeah, so there's a lot out there. So you can utilize these standardization programs. And I know with ISO, you can get certified with them, or you can do a self-assessment also. So there are ways you can do this. Why do we bring this up? You want to have a good disaster plan, a good business continuity plan. I always tell people, so look, if you've got a comprehensive program for business continuity, you know what, you turn it around and use it as a marketing tool. Let your customers know that you've got disaster plans in place, and then we're going to talk more about having the vendors having plans too. That'll come up in a few minutes, but do everything you can to protect yourself, and then also promote it where you can. I'm not saying to go out and hang the banner on the side of the building, but businesses that don't have disaster plans are going to fall behind, okay? Because everybody's asking for it. I worked for a company. I worked at Office Depot after the 04-05 hurricane season. Now we demanded that all of our vendors had disaster plans in place, some level. By the way, I work for big companies and small companies, and of course, big companies, big fat binders of disaster plans. Listen, if you're a small, medium-sized business, your disaster plan may only be 10 pages, 15 pages. As long as you're covering the critical components, which we're going to talk about some more, and you've got it well documented, and your staff knows, you're ahead of the game.
I also just wanted to make note that, if you have customers, a lot of times they'll come looking to you and say, do you have a business continuity and disaster recovery program? And you can say, yes, and I follow these and use them as guidelines. So it adds some weight to your program saying that, you've got some substance behind it.
Yeah, Karen, I've seen also many times where a company submits an RFP, RFQ, RFI, they want to see if we have a disaster plan. And then many times a potential business deal, they may say, hey, we want to see a plan. Well, in that case, no, sorry. Why? Our disaster plans have proprietary information in them. So we don't put them out for distribution outside the company. What you can do is create a summary of what plans you have and what they cover. And usually that is well enough, good enough to show the company that you've done your due diligence. And that's really what they're looking for. Have you done your due diligence here? Have you done everything you can? Disasters, there's so many variables, so many things can happen. You may not answer all the questions, but we want to see if you've done something about this.
What we have done is we've created a one-page statement of recoverability that anybody can share with customers that does address, we have a business continuity program, we have a disaster recovery program, we have emergency management plans, et cetera, et cetera. And just at a very high level, a one-pager that anyone in the organization has access to and can be shared with customers. So, legal has reviewed it, they've agreed, given it its stamp of approval, because most likely you're going to need that. But if you don't already have something like that and you find that customers are asking these same questions, I think it would behoove you to create a one-pager that can be given out.
Karen, does that solve like 90% of the requests for information? Does that help out?
Yes, I would say yes. And then the ones that come back, to be totally honest, I feel like sometimes they don't know what they're asking. They found something online and I can reference back, oh yes, that was answered there. That was answered there. Now, sometimes they do ask deeper dive questions and we're fine and available, but to your point, probably 90% will take that.
Right. Good. I see Penny had mentioned in the chat that sometimes where she is, they share the table of contents with the request. So that's another opportunity perhaps for you to satisfy the request.
Right.
So Karen, what do we have? When we talk about planning, I know we're going to get into this a little bit more now. Planning can be an arduous task. So what have you seen from the planning standpoint and tools and what's a medium?
Okay, so yeah, this is what I was excited to share with you all. And if anybody has any questions offline, we just went through a large RFP for a new SaaS, software as a service provider for our business continuity, disaster recovery, incident management software. So let me just start by saying, some organizations don't need a software tool. Our organization does, and the value for us is it helps us to standardize the plan, the ease of updating a plan in terms of, if an application, we were using ABC application and now it's called DEF, I can just change the application ABC to DEF and it pushes out to all of the plans that it was listed in. So, one and done updating. It streamlines the process because you're doing the same thing across the board for the entire organization. I am an advocate for a SaaS product because it eliminates some manual input. If you are not connecting this product to your HR data for employees, you're having to do double the work. Type in names, you can fat finger phone numbers. You're using a system of record, which is already in existence, to populate your plans. So huge advocate for that, and the ability to integrate other data, not only HR data, you could have file feeds of your technologies. You could have whatever you want imported if the tool can take it, which 99% can.
Yeah, and like you said, a lot of tools now have the API and the other utilities to connect databases and pull in information. Like you said, taking the HR data from your Workday or something else and pulling it down to the tool. The planning tools have come a long way. Karen, as you know, last time I was at DRJ conference a couple months ago, I made it a point to talk to all the software guys to see what they did, what they have, and they were, a lot of them really tout, of course, maybe with a grain of salt, they tout how easy it is. Oh yeah, you can pull this in and pull that in. You have API front end or just do a download of the data, but it is a lot easier than it was years ago. Now, is that what you're seeing today, Karen?
Yeah, and I just want to say, so like how I approach this, we currently have a SaaS product and we're moving to a new SaaS product. Well, going from one SaaS product to another SaaS product isn't as easy as it should seem with any of the vendors. And I had a scope of about 6 to begin with. We got it down to 3. And one thing I would highly recommend if you're going through this is to make the vendor have a sandbox available to you and to try and populate it with your own data. Like I took one business continuity plan and one disaster recovery plan, recreated them in their tools so I could see what I liked and didn't like about each one of the different tools that we were looking at.
Interesting. Good. Hey, listen, I'm old school here, so I started with the spreadsheets and the Word documents, and a lot of companies that I've seen still utilize that, because it's inexpensive. They don't have the budget for it. People know how to use these tools. But I also tell people, so look, if you're going to use your spreadsheets, use them in a smart way. And I try to explain to folks how to write macros so they can add information, from multiple sheets together. Because I tell them, after you do your BIA and you put your data into your spreadsheet, and one spreadsheet per department, I say, how do you total that up? Oh, we'll go through and manually add it up. I said, no, you got spreadsheets here. Write a macro, let the macro add them up for you. So learn the programming side of spreadsheets, and then how to incorporate some of that into your Word documents. But yeah, I mean, a lot of companies still doing that, and even the smaller companies don't have the appetite for bringing in a tool like Fusion or one of these other guys. I mean, and the tools work great, but it's really you have to scale it to the size of your business.
Exactly. And you need to know what's right, not only for your business, but for your end users too. Because you could have the Rolls Royce of softwares, but if these people are only going into it once a year or as needed to update, if it's not easy to use, what's the value?
Right. All right. So we've got the tools there. We have ways to do it. SaaS tools, software, spreadsheets, of course, Word documents. But what are we putting into this? Now, there's a key component here. I think not every company understands the need of a comprehensive business impact analysis, or BIA, is what we call it. You've got to do a proper BIA of your organization to understand what you do, who you are, what's critical, what are the processes that have to be recovered first and last. What are the functions here? What's your IT support? Things like that. So, when I do a BIA, I do it several ways. First of all, we create a questionnaire and just get to understand the department and some of their functions. What do they really do? We talk about accounting. Okay, well, accounting is a very general term, and in different companies, the accounting people do different things. When I was at Office Depot, the treasury was under accounting, which in some companies treasury is separate. So you really have to make sure you do that so you don't lose, you don't leave anyone behind. And then you've got to, I sit down and do a 1 to 2 hour interview with the heads of the departments, and then get them to talk about what they do, what's critical for them, what is the revenue generation of their department, what happens if they can't operate for a day, a week, a month, what is the exposure to the company, and that's the kind of thing that's going to help define where they fit in the recovery scheme. If you've got a department and you're a manufacturer of widgets, and your manufacturing goes down, what are you losing per day? What if I can't make widgets today? What's my net loss? Okay, how long can I tolerate that loss? What are the shareholders going to do? So you've got to start identifying that. So there's plenty of resources out on the web if you want to do BIA analysis. I mentioned the standard programs before, ISO and NIST and things like that. Will help guide you through some of that BIA. It's a little tricky because the BIA is really tailored to your business. Okay, so you can get a template out there, but you really have to look at it and understand what is that you're driving. The other thing is you have to make sure that you're getting the right information in order to make the right decision later. Okay, without a good comprehensive BIA, your BCP plan may fail. Oh, why is that, Tom? Yeah, Karen, go ahead.
No, I want to just circle back to you saying, okay, so you did send out a survey, but then you met with them to make sure you understood and they understood what they were filling out. I think that's a key component here, because we cannot assume their understanding. And by conducting in-person BIAs, I found that we were able to tailor or stop people from, they were listing tasks as processes. So they would come back and have like 10 different things. I'm like, are they all done by the same people? Yes, but blah, 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 blah. They're different. I'm like, if they're done by the same people, let's consider combining them into one process. And then whatever is most critical in that process is what we will scope around, if you will.
And define it as a task. Right.
Yes.
Right.
So.
Well, and you know, that's very important to consider that, because you're right. These people, these are business people for the most part. They don't understand the disaster world. They don't do it on a daily basis. So yes, questionnaire is good. Going back and interviewing them so they understand what they're filling out and we can understand what they're talking about, you know, is essential. The interesting thing here, it actually makes the BCP person pretty well versed in the business, for one. So you really get a good understanding of where the linkages have to be. But it also lets these guys know that, hey, the company's trying to do something, so in case we have a disaster, we don't go out of business. The big thing here, I always tell people when I talk to clients, is that our job is to make the disaster transparent to the customer. That customer could be a patient. It could be a customer that walks into a store, you know, with Office Depot. You know, the guy in California walks into a store and buys a pencil, doesn't care that we're having a hurricane in Florida. He wants to buy that pencil. You know, your customers at your bank want that ATM to be working when they go to the bank. So our job is to make the disaster transparent, and it starts here. So get the right information from your department heads. That information will drive the BCP, the business continuity plan. Okay, what's critical? What do we have to recover first? What's our focus? Hey, if we don't do this, we're going to lose $1 million a day. You know what? That's a pretty big business decision. So let's focus on that. Define what those critical operations are, and it could be several of them. Also, understand the fact that criticality versus essential. What's critical to have and what's essential to have. I've done BIAs where I've had departments say, look, we're critical, but you don't need us in the first week. Okay, good. Let me put you on the side. But what that does give me, it gives me that the manpower from that team that I can use up front if I need them. So what's critical to making the operation run, but also then what's essential? You've got to do, you're regulated in the banking industry, you've got to do regular reporting. The day of disaster, is that critical? Maybe not. It might be in a week, or we have to do quarterly reporting or things like that. So we really have to gauge it out. And that's what you have to drop, what you have to pull from the BIA. So I know this is very brief and we're kind of going over here, but don't minimize this part of your planning process. And if you don't know how to do a business impact analysis, bring somebody in, you know, do the research, go online, figure it out, because this, in my experience, this will make or break your program right here.
I like to say it's the framework of your plan.
Good,
So
good choice, good choice of words.
If you're building a house, you need the frame first.
Yep.
So when you're building a business continuity plan, you need the BIA first.
So another big part of your plan, though, is your contacting and reaching out to your employees. Karen, give us your insights to this. I know you and I talked a lot about this.
Yes, we did, and we kind of agree to disagree a little on this. So in a traditional business continuity plan, people were building call lists. I have come to the conclusion that, and would like everybody's thoughts, and you can put it in the chat or whatever, do we really need quote unquote old school call trees anymore? If we have an employee list in the plan, and the way I have them set up is in the plan by manager. So in theory, the manager could call all of the employees under them, but I'm not actually having to build an old school call tree. Tom calls, Karen calls, Julie calls Adam, so and so forth, because we also are utilizing a notification tool. And so with the notification tool, we don't really have call trees anymore. Wanted to know anybody else's thoughts on that. I know, Tom, why don't you tell them why we disagree?
All right, I'll tell you why we disagree. Of course, I am, like I said, old school. I've done call trees before, but I've had the luxury of using mass notification tools. My last job at a healthcare company, we had one, we used the Everbridge product. So we set it up to be able to create a group for everybody at headquarters. So if we had to put out a quick blast, hey, you know, active shooter, severe weather, things like that, we can notify everybody on the Miami campus of what was going on. In addition, when we had disasters, we created groups for all the medical centers. So we were able to reach out through our mass notification tool to all the directors of the medical centers. But that's as far as we went with it. You know, we didn't go deeper with it, as in identifying all the employees, you know, every single employee at every single center. Why? It's very cumbersome. if you're going to go with a mass notification tool, you've got to make sure you have somebody to administer it, right, and manage it and things like that. I was a team of one. I told my boss, look, I don't have the time to do this, especially during a disaster where I'm actually also the crisis manager, to be messing around with the mass notification tool. So what we did is within the centers, they had their own call trees. So they knew everybody, the 20 or 30 or 40 employees that work in each center, they knew who to contact. They were going to have the call tree then. So we front ended with the mass notification, back ended with a call tree. And I left it with managers and say, look, if you want this thing to be fully blown out, you've got to have more resources here to help manage this. So, but the problem also then is with the call tree is the break in the chain. If somebody misses the call, does that stop, or do we know to go past that person and call the next one? So there are a lot of pros and cons. Personally, I like the mass notification tool. I can send it out to so many people at the same time, to their cell phone, to their home phone, to their texting, yada, 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 5, 6 different mediums. So
I feel like a mass
yeah.
notification system has been a game changer for a lot of things. And I feel like, there is a fine line though. You don't want to overutilize the tool. Like, I can give you an example. Other departments have started coming to us and said, can we use that to notify ABC of C, whatever? And we're like, Rick has laid down the law. He has told them, no, 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 because we don't want to oversaturate them and desensitize them. Like, when our alerts come, they're important, pay attention. And we want them to have that same impact.
Karen, that's a great point, because we actually had that conversation too, is we want to use mass notification for general business sharing. And we said, no, we don't, because when they get the alert from us, we want them to pay attention to it. Well, that means there's something going on. So yeah, great point there. So, I mean, and there are different sizes and different pricing and there are so many different tools out there. Go see our friends at Early Alert Media and see what they have to offer. So even small businesses, your 10 or your 50 employees, you really need to be looking at this. It's going to save you a lot of heartache on the back end, I think. So look at some sort of mass notification tool. So, addition, then let's talk about some of the content. What is in our plans here? And we really need to make sure we've got the right information in the plan. There's no right or wrong way to plan. Okay, you really have to base it upon your business needs, the way you operate. Could be cultural components that are brought into play and to help define how your plan is set up. Regulatory things, so it really depends. The key thing here is to create a plan that's going to work for you and exercise it. And we're going to talk a little bit more about exercising in a few minutes, but follow your regulations or your standards. Go back to your ISO and do a self-certification. Your plans can either be location specific or process specific. Okay, now Karen and I, we agree to disagree here again. I like the fact that when I write plans for clients, I make them location specific, because disasters happen by location for the most part. I know we have broad disasters and things like that, but when I look at a scenario, I say, okay, I lost my headquarter building, or I lost a car stock or a warehouse. I lost a retail operation. So I always look at it by the location, and I want to have plans per location. I've had bosses tell me in the past, oh, write a business continuity plan for the company. I say, well, what does that mean for the company? Well, write it for the whole company. I can't write it for the whole company. I got to make it. I have to slice it up. I don't need a pie in one bite. I have to slice it up here and say, okay, I've got a plan for headquarters. So if I lose headquarters, this is what I do. I have a plan for a retail store. This is what I do. I plan for a hospital, a health center. This is what I do. So I look at it. I like to look at it by location. But Karen's going to tell you about how she looks at it from the process level.
So I like to look at it scenario. So I'll write a plan for a department and include all of the different locations in there, but write it for loss of building, loss of people, or loss of technology. Now, we're fortunate enough that we have our critical operations geographically dispersed. So there are redundancies there. So I feel that's why I can write my plans that way. And again, there's no right or wrong way. Tom likes to do it his way. I like to do it my way. Everybody raise their hand if they like it my way. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Um, but again, there is no one size fits all for anyone. And you need to do what's best for your organization. So we just wanted to make you aware that they can be done several different ways, and either one is right, depending on what's best for your organization.
Yeah. But and on top of that, well, whichever way you want to go with, make sure you test it, make sure you exercise it, because you've got to make sure the plan works at disaster time. I can't stress that enough. Having gone through a real disaster, the value that having good plans brings to the table actually allowed us to save ourselves. We were able to do our recovery. We knew exactly what departments were needed the first day, the second day, the fifth day, how many people, where do we have recovery locations set up. We were able to be flexible because we did have a plan. So I tell people, look, don't use your plan verbatim all the time, because there are so many variables in a disaster. You don't know what's going to be coming to you. So be a little flexible here with this. Also, then in your planning, include assumptions. What does a plan cover? What doesn't it cover? What's the scope of the plan? Hey, this plan covers just a headquarter building based here in Delray Beach, Florida. That's it. Don't pull up this plan if you lose a store in California, because it's not going to work. I've got a separate plan for that. What's included here? There are certain departments that may not be included here because they can sit up by the side until we get back to business, regular business. So make sure you put those things in there. Include your processes, your task lists, your checklists, the executable portion of the plan. So I always tell my folks, I say, look, when a disaster happens, we declare, don't start reading at page 1, because that's going to be ineffective. Why? Because the first 4 chapters are fluff. It tells you about the company. Oh yeah, well, we have this plan here and our approach is this, and this is what we're going to do. Yeah, first 4 chapters are fluff. The 5th chapter, I always call it the 5th chapter, that's the executable part of the plan. That's where your checklists are. That's where you're going to pull it out of the binder and start executing and checking off, saying this was completed by whom, at what time, and what day, right? Because this documentation has to be saved for later on. So look at the plan, and I tell my executives, and they fail to do it all the time, don't start reading at page 1 at time of disaster. Go to chapter 5, pull it out, and start executing. We talked about vendors before. Okay, we had to vet our vendors. Do they have plans? Are they going to satisfy us? COVID and the pandemic brought a huge impact to supply chain. Right? What were some of these guys doing? This road blockage on I-95 in Pennsylvania with the fire and the road collapse. That's going to have an impact on supply chain, and a huge impact. And we may be seeing shippers that don't travel 7 days a week now. They're only going to travel 3 days a week, or maybe at nighttime on the Jersey Turnpike instead of going down I-95. This can have a big impact. This can change the way you do a little bit of business, and not just in that area. It could be a change of the timing of goods that come from the Northeast down to the Southeast or cross country. So, but also make sure your vendors are ready. When you have a disaster test, an exercise, invite the vendors. Let them play their part of the plan, right? Because they're going to love working with you, because you're going to show them that we are on top of it. Okay, yes, we know what we're doing here. We want to exercise with you. I've done this many times with many of my clients. Invite the customers in, invite the vendors in, and let them see that you've got this either buttoned down, or let them see that hey, we've got some issues here. Okay, let's fix the issues. Why? Because it's better to find the issue during an exercise than it is during a disaster.
Well, and I think that goes both ways. You should offer to participate in your vendor testing also if they allow it, because you'll learn some things, not only about your plan, but about their planning, and better understand.
Yeah, Karen, it's got to be a two-way street when it comes down to this. And even if you invite the emergency management, fire, police, some of those folks in, let them see what you've got, and that's always a great value. When we talk about building public-private partnerships, fire, police, emergency responders are the first teams I go after. I say, hey, we're here. We want to work with you. We want to make sure that when there's a situation, it could be as safe as possible for you and your team, as well as for the people on our team. So yeah, invite them to your plan, invite your vendors, like I said, and let them see what you've got. So Karen, tell me more. We talk about leveraging resources, and there are a lot of resources around, but what are your thoughts on this topic here?
What we were trying to convey here is that, once you have all of your plans done, you may be able to look through another lens and say, okay, what are all my non-critical processes? What could they do to help if we have an incident? to support the critical processes. And I can give you a real life example. So during COVID, we had all of this incoming mail coming in because we are an HR service provider that have all of these administrative tasks. You don't need to be part of that team to be able to open mail and put it in piles. Basically, what happened is we were able to pull people from different departments that were performing non-critical roles and really had not much to do, and they were able to assist with these administrative tasks. And out of that, now in their business continuity plan, I had them document what the process was for getting those people, i.e. what departments they reached out to, who those employees were who assisted them. So now it's in their plan, and if they ever need to call upon extra hands and resources again, they don't have to spend a day figuring it out again. They have a repeatable, sustainable process.
Good, good. Hey, and you've got to look outside your four walls too. When you're in the middle of a disaster, especially a regional disaster, hurricane, earthquake, fires, things like that, the other businesses on your street and in your area having the same concerns. What are we going to do here? How do we get fuel? How do we get food and things like that? When we started doing public-private partnerships down here in South Florida 15 years ago or so, 20 years ago, we talked to the other businesses and we said, what are your concerns during a disaster? Well, we got to feed the people. We got to do daycare if we want employees to come back. We have to get gas. When we have hurricanes and the power's out, we can't get gas at gas stations. So we have to get fuel so employees can drive into work and drive home again and things like that. Well, that's where we started doing the PPPs down here, is getting businesses together saying, okay, we all have the same problems here. How do we leverage this? Let's go talk to a fuel company. Instead of him bringing fuel for one company, he's bringing it for 6 businesses right down the same avenue. He's making better money that way instead of driving all over the place at 6 different locations. So, they're willing to work with you if we put the issue on the table in front of them.
And it's always better to have that ahead of time than during the incident. And also, networking via professional organizations.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how many, you already spoke to it, that you've reached out to contacts before. Yes, through networking, through conferences, you meet different people. That's how I met Tom and Julie, and some others on this call. And the great thing about that is, everybody in this industry, I feel, wholeheartedly wants to help each other and will help each other and share information as long as it's not, proprietary or confidential. So I don't know how many times I've shot off an email, said, does anybody have something that deals with this? I'm trying to figure this out. Because before Rick came on, I was a party of one as well. And, sometimes you just need to bounce ideas off of people to move forward. So, you have resources within PSEMA, within networking organizations, by going to conferences. And it's really important to leverage those opportunities because, someone else has been there, done that, and probably most likely more than willing to help.
Yeah, and that's a drive. I mean, this has all been a driver for PSEMA. How do we get the private sector to help the private sector without the government trying to run the program? Why? Because 80% of our recovery is done by the private sector. So yeah, we've got a partner. We have to network. Plenty of opportunities out there. Become a member of this organization. Join your ACP or other organizations, because it's going to be a wealth of benefit to you. But let's go real quick here. We talk about exercise and testing. I have done dozens and dozens and dozens of exercises through my career. And it builds muscle memory. It makes people familiar with the processes. You've got to exercise. And it's going to identify the shortcomings of your plan before a disaster happens. You want to make sure your processes are complete, identify those gaps. Nothing worse than having a major gap in the middle of a disaster. Get that muscle memory, as you mentioned, and satisfy the company needs and the auditor regulation. Many companies now are being audited on their exercises. So you've got to make sure not only do you do the exercise, that it's documented properly, so you can hand it to the auditor, and typically they give you a grade on it. But one key component here is crisis management. And I've done a lot of crisis management in my days. I've been the crisis management leader, put teams together. the key thing is here is during a disaster, somebody has to be in control. Who's in charge here? And it doesn't have to be the smartest guy on the block. It doesn't have to be the highest executive. It was me. But, somebody's got to be in control here to be able to herd the cats. Okay. You've got so many different things happening during a real disaster, is that you've got, and all these department people, and everybody thinks they know what to do, how to run the program. Time out, guys. We have a crisis management team. We blow the whistle. Everybody meet in the conference room. Okay, finance, here's the situation. What do you need? HR, what do you need? Construction, what do you need? Facilities. And you basically become the central point of command to make sure that things are getting done. You may not know how to get things done, but you need to make sure you got the right people around you who can get things done. Right? Your crisis management team needs to be established. When I was at my last company, they didn't have a crisis management team. By the time I left, they were thrilled that we had this wheel of resources with the crisis manager in the middle, who was able to just kind of harness what was going on. Okay, guys, we're going to have meetings at this time. Here's the information. We're going to push out twice a day. Crisis manager is getting feeds from all over the place. PSEMA now becomes a new feed for the crisis manager, and being able to help coordinate so people are doing the right job during a disaster and during response and during recovery.
And it's also important to note that, once you establish this team, as well as testing your plan, you need to test this team again. So that way, everybody knows their role when the incident occurs. Testing, testing, testing. That's Tom's middle name.
Tom testing. But it's important, and Karen understands it, and you guys need to understand it too, the value of testing, the value of exercises. You can do full-blown exercises. They have micro simulations they're doing now. There are companies out there like Illuminar that helps you define these micro simulations. So it's getting very slick. And look, guys, let's be honest. All right, if you don't survive the next disaster, shame on you. Right? We know they're coming. We know there's going to be severe weather, climate change, earthquakes, civil unrest. Whatever. I mean, now we have the thing with the Trump going on in Miami. I mean, they're gearing up for social unrest down there. Well, let's a couple more slides here real quick. Crisis communications. Communication is key. I teach this class for ICOR, crisis communications. It's essential. You have to know who your shareholders are. What do you say to the internal people, the employees? What do you say to the externals, the shareholders, the executives? What's the messaging, and to whom, and who owns the messaging, and how often do you get it out? So you really have to think about this. It's not always a best practice to put the CEO in front of a microphone the first day. But the problem with that is, if the CEO says something incorrect, who's going to correct it? So I like to say, I tell my clients, I say, look, put your legal counsel up there, put your PR guy up there, let him be the spokesperson, the familiar face. If they say something incorrect, then the CEO can come in and correct that. Karen, any thoughts on that?
No, the only thing, in talking about your crisis communications, if you are using, or maybe even if not, you're using a notification tool for some of this, you can pre-populate messages by category, have pre-canned messages that you can use, so you don't have to create them on the fly and just tweak them as you go, if you will.
Yeah.
And we found that has been helpful. It takes some of the, onus off of, okay, this happened, we need to send out a message. Okay,
Right.
it's for this.
Yeah.
Yes.
Good. Okay, let's get on to our final thoughts here.
Okay. Returning to business as usual planning. I think it's important that there's a process in place of who says we're going to return to business as usual. What's the time frame? Is it going to be all at once? Is it going to be a phased approach? That needs to be determined ahead of time, because there may be interdependencies. If it's you're recovering a data center and technology, all of this, the infrastructure needs to be up before all of the applications work. So you don't want to tell your employees that, get back to work until those other things have happened. So it's just understanding the priorities of what needs to happen, in what order things need to happen, is important.
Yeah, it's a huge step that most companies don't plan for, but they never think that far down the road. Well, you've got to think about how do we come back. I worked at Verizon for 9 years, and my job was to be out going to disasters. I've been to dozens of disasters. And the biggest question and concern we always had was, when do we decide to go home? When do we decide that, hey, our network's good, we've done everything we can to support the community, charging stations, cell phones, towers, cows and colts. So the biggest question was always, when do we call it and when do we go back to business? Because we still have a business to run back at home base. The hardest one was probably during Superstorm Sandy. We were down there for several weeks, and the executives came in one day when we were on the ground in Queens, New York, and they said, okay, we really need to consider pulling back. It's okay. Then we decide why. How's everything working? Well, FEMA's got it under control. We're 3 weeks into it. Network coverage is just about back everywhere, so you don't need the extra devices, and charging stations now being handled by the Red Cross, so that we don't need to do them anymore. So a lot of things. And then how do you move that data back? How do you move the people back? Is it in stages, like Aaron said? Do we cut over on a weekend? So we have 2 days, 3 days to move everything back. So Monday morning, it's BAU. So tricky plans, but it needs to be considered, because a lot of companies don't think about it. Then they're into the disaster for 2 weeks. Like, oh well, how do we go home? How do we take this out of the third party hot site? How do we get the 100 people back home that all have to fly, or whatever the logistics may be? So that is a part of the planning process, is the return to BAU. So, and I know Karen and I worked this past couple of weeks getting this together. We know it's very high level, but we want to make sure that you guys are listening to this and saying, hey, maybe some good nuggets of information, maybe some things we can follow up on. If you haven't already looked, check in the chat. There's a lot of great comments and questions out there. Julie, let me ask you: are we able to scrape that chat and hold on to that the things, right?
Oh yeah. I save all the chats along with the recording. So I think what we'll do now, we've got a little over 5 minutes. I've seen some chats. I don't know if anyone has any questions or thoughts, want to jump in.
And oh, by the way, that the picture I have there, this is why they tell you to not drive through flooded roads, because the road may not be there. This is a photograph from North Carolina after Hurricane Michael. This road was washed out. And so, you've got to be careful out there. You have to heed the warnings and, understand what's happening in the environment there. Thank you, Persia.
I'm just going to open it up so we can see if anybody wants to raise their hand or just jump in. Please feel free. I'll take.
Did you see the third-party coordination is also important from Dr. Lorenzo Sanchez? This is something my organization needs to do a better job with. Can 3 Ps meet our needs during a crisis? Yes, I think you bring up a great point. But again, I would think, does your third party have a plan? Have you looked at that plan? Have they tested? If that's what you mean, or do you want it? Am I answering your question?
Sure. I'm here. I hope you can hear me. I've worked in several organizations. Right now I'm at Trinity University, but for a while I was at USAA, and I know that they have a much bigger, obviously, workforce that works with like third party. They even have third party risk management, teams in place. And that was one lesson learned from USAA that I've taken here, is to really question my third party providers on, if we needed to use your services on campus, let's say for dining services, like the Texas winter storm, the power was out on campus and so was water. And so we started all hitting up our third parties on how would they help us in those situations. But we don't know if they've tested their own plans. And honestly, I just don't have the bandwidth to be able to do that. So sometimes we take it at face value, right? That they say, oh yeah, we have a plan. We just brought on board a new dining provider for campus, and the first thing I asked him was, I need to see your business continuity plan, because I don't have the time to chase it down. Much larger, particularly in the financial sector, they have teams that just do that stuff. When I used to live in Florida and work in Florida, and one thing we would always do over there was try to diversify your third parties. If everyone's trying to hit up the same provider for fuel, can they meet that demand? They may have tested their plans, but they may just not physically have enough to get to it. So these are all the things that I think that I just try to incorporate into my business continuity program, and keeps me up,
Right.
I guess.
So in your plan, do you have under the vendor question, them identify any alternate vendors if the primary vendor is unavailable? That's one thing I've done. Now, it's not like you can go and engage with them and say, hey, if they're unavailable, what can you do for me? You know, that's
Yeah.
not necessarily the case, but at least if you knew that, okay, this dining service, is there another big name in the area that perhaps
And that's
could
where we
be a
need to do better.
backup?
That's what we need to do a better job on. I guess that's where I'm coming from on that
Yeah.
perspective.
Lorenzo, one of the things we did was we looked for resources outside the area. So if we're going to get hit with a hurricane in Florida, I know my Florida, my fuel depot is not going to be open. The trucks aren't going to run. How can I secure something from outside? When we had Hurricane Wilma and we got impacted on our campus, we actually had our head of the cafeteria services had a buddy who ran a McDonald's, and they brought in several hundred sandwiches every morning. They cooked them overnight. They bought them in egg muffins or whatever it was, but they bought enough in because now we could tell the employees, hey, come to work and we're going to feed you and we're going to give you 10 seconds on the gas nozzle out of it. So little things, and listen, there are no rules. At time of disaster, there are no rules. You do what you got to do to survive. And that means getting a resource from Ohio to come down to Florida for fuel or food or whatever. I've got a job to do. My job is to keep my business running, keep my people safe.
So I see
Okay.
Robert has his hand up. Sorry, I was going to say, Robert, you want to jump in?
Yeah, no, thanks, Penny. I'll add one thing to the conversation. And, having gone through the Kronos outage, and probably many of you have also been through the Kronos outage, we all got, at least in my experience, we all got copies of Kronos's disaster recovery plan. We got assurances on their testing, whether that be an attestation or whether they provided the results on the testing, right? And that was all perfect and good until it wasn't, right? When they failed and then it didn't work anymore, right? No matter the degree of attestation or the degree of inquiry that was done with the vendor, there was no way to sidestep that. And so I'll agree with a couple of things that Karen was saying about making sure that in that third-party risk management conversation, going back to the originator, what do you do if your vendor can't continue to provide services, right? Who is your alternate? And extend that question to beyond just, it's not just necessarily an operational outage, right? It could be a reputational risk, right? So what if your vendor is found to be using child labor or slave labor, or they're abusing their employees, right? That could all have cascading effects where maybe you quickly need to shift vendors. And I know in the cloud space, on a technology side, one of the things that's also a strategy that I've seen used is, instead of building into AWS or Azure natively, using either Docker or Kubernetes to containerize applications, do microservices and things that are containerized, so that if you have to extract it from Microsoft and move it to somewhere else, into GCP or into AWS, you can do that quickly without having to have all of these elements that are you've built into their native technologies. You can just move the payload somewhere else and continue to operate and run it. So, this is a really tough nut to crack. And frankly, I think there's a lot of assessments that are done that maybe aren't even worth the paper that they're written on. At least that's my experience.
Hey, Robert, good to see you. I like your thought on containerizing. That makes life a little bit easier. And in addition to the Kronos outage, a lot of people don't realize, or they do realize, AWS went down twice in December of 2022.
Oh, sure.
Right. And a lot of people don't know what to do about that, because everybody thinks AWS, oh, it's in the cloud, it's backed up, and I can recover it. No, you've got to go in and understand what's happening in the cloud environment if you're gonna put your recovery scheme up there.
Mark, did you have a comment you wanted to jump in on? Sorry, we're getting close to 3 o'clock. We can stay on for a couple more minutes for you guys. Anybody has questions? So.
Sure. Can you see me? Just
Yes.
one thing, and that's because Kronos is mentioned. I'm a Bostonian, and Kronos is a local house for us. They have done, admittedly, and clients may not believe this, but they've done a tremendous job of keeping it out of the press, out of the media. I thought they were dead when this first kicked off, but they've done an unbelievable job managing the communications, managing the messaging, and keeping a low profile for all the stuff they went through. That was a huge outage, and yet you didn't read that much about it afterwards. It was just kept under wraps. So somebody in Kronos has done a tremendous job. Now, clients may not feel that way, I'm sure they don't, but the outside world didn't see Kronos as being the bad guy, at least not for a long period of time.
Really good
Good to see you,
point.
Mark.
So I thank everybody for being on today. I think we're going to not have a webinar in July, but look at trying to do a networking session where we bring everybody together and talk about what issues are we seeing midways through this year, looking forward into not just hurricane season, but those other unexpected events that could be out there. But stay tuned for that information. And then we'll be picking back up on the monthly webinars in August and September and going forward. So if anybody has any questions or wants to keep talking, we'll stay on, but I always try to be respectful of the time. It is 3 o'clock, and I thank everybody for being on. I think it was a good discussion. And again, we will be sending out the presentation and a link to the webinar that's on our website as well. So if anybody has any other questions, feel free to jump in now. If not, we will see everybody next month for a little bit of a different format.
Great. Thank you, Julie.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Julie.
You guys have a good one.